Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Welcome to Beach Walk Vlog. Today we're going to be talking about strength training for runners. So I want to just have a chat. I want to just talk about strength training a little bit, and I want to talk about some specifics of strength training. Now, runners get a lot of things thrown at them. And those things that they get thrown at them could be something like, do some squats, do some lunges, do some, do CrossFit, do Pilates, do this exercise, do that exercise. And this can come from various different places. You know, I mentioned Pilates, I mentioned squats, I mentioned CrossFit, and none of them are specific for running. Yet a lot of people think, a lot of runners think that just because I'm doing an exercise that involves the legs, then I must be training the running muscles, or it must come out in the wash that somehow my running muscles are getting worked. And to a point that might be true depending on what exercise you're doing and how you're doing it. And you might get lucky. You might get lucky in that an exercise that you do may work some of those running muscles fibers, because remember, if you do a exercise that doesn't actually overload specific muscle fibers with a specific load at a specific place at a specific time, then it's not going to quote unquote strength train those muscles and those muscle fibers, because in order to get a increase in strength, we have to overload the muscle fibers in question. Now, in order to overload the muscle fibers in question, we've got to first know which muscle group they're in and whether the exercise that you've chosen to do actually does train those muscle fibers or train those muscles. And then we've got to know whether those specific muscle fibers in question got trained in that exercise. So that's the biggest problem as far as I can see, is that you got to firstly think of the muscles that need to be trained. Then you've got to think of how much force do those specific muscles need to produce in order to get a strength training effect. And then you've got to think of, well, which specific muscle fibers within those muscles. So when we think about which specific muscle fibers, we've got to think about the range of motion. So there's a really good exercise that runners get thrown at them, which is the calf raise. And calf raise really doesn't work very well for runners. And the main reason is because they're doing them wrong. You might not be doing a calf raise wrong, but the calf raise isn't the exercise, it's the wrong exercise. So you've got the wrong exercise training the wrong muscle group, which therefore is training the wrong muscle fibers, because if it's training the wrong muscle group, then it has to be training the wrong muscle fibers, because you can't be training the correct muscle fibers if you're not even in the right place. It's like saying that I should be going to Birmingham when I actually end up in London, or saying that I wanted to go to LA and I ended up in New York. You're in the wrong place, right? So you can't be in the right part of the wrong town, because there isn't a right part of the wrong town. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So the exercise choice needs to be correct, firstly, to work the correct muscles. So like I said, the calf raise, a lot of people are doing calf raises with straight legs, and well, in running the knee never straightens, and when the load is applied, the knee is quite heavily bent. And in running, when the foot is on the ground and the knee is heavily bent, that means that we're in very pretty deep dorsiflexion, which means that if the knee is bent, the gastrocnemius isn't doing the work. And if we're in dorsiflexion, that means that the soleus muscle is going to be pretty much at full length. So if you're doing a calf raise with straight knees, you're training the wrong muscle, period. Let's just stop it there. You're training the wrong muscle. So let's take it one further, training the wrong muscle in the wrong way, in the wrong range of motion, with the wrong position. So now we're back to position. Now we're back to train the position. Because if you train the position with the correct force, you're going to get the right muscle. Now let's talk about squats. Now, a lot of people love squats. It's almost like a religion when we talk about squats and squatting. And as I've said so many times before, if you enjoy squats, then carry on doing squats. If you want to get better at doing squats, you have to do squats. If you want to get better at squatting, you have to do squats. But is doing squats using the correct muscles? No, it's not. And this is where I always have this interesting conversation with people when I say, so which muscles do so many runners have problems with? It's the hamstrings, right? And the calves. So is squatting using the hamstrings or strengthening the hamstrings? There's a very important difference there between using and strengthening. Yes, squats do use the hamstrings, and I'm broadly speaking of the hamstrings because, as we know, there's three hamstring muscles, but there's 4 heads or 4 parts specifically. Squats do not work the hamstrings in any way, shape or form as a strengthening exercise. So yes, they utilize the hamstrings because the hamstrings are a multi-joint muscle group, and also a single joint muscle group because we have the short head of the bicep femoris. So yes, they do get worked, but not very much. In fact, the research shows that the hamstrings get used very, very, very little. So let's go back to what I said at the beginning. In order to get a strengthening effect, we have to push their tolerance, we have to push their limit. So if you're not using a muscle very much at all, then how are you going to push its limit if you're not using it very much at all? So we know that the hamstrings, a lot of runners have problems with the hamstrings because they're very weak, because they're very underused, and then they go and do squats because, you know, of course squats use the legs, right? But as we've just established, they don't use the hamstrings much at all. So using the squats as a strengthening exercise for the legs negates in almost fully the hamstrings. It does negate fully the internal rotation. It does negate the concentric action of the hamstrings, the adductors, for internal rotation and extension. And it's the wrong movement. It's pushing the weight upwards, it's moving the force upwards, whereas we want to be moving we want to be pushing backwards or thrusting a load forwards, right? So squats fail, calf raises fail. Let's talk about planks. So planks, remember, you have to be using the correct muscle group in the correct place at the correct time, doing the correct movement for the correct range of motion. So what is running? What is running as far as our torso is concerned? Well, it's lateral spinal flexion with thoracic and lumbar spinal rotation. So we know that in running, your shoulder girdle, your thoracic spine rotates one way, as the lumbar spine and the pelvis rotates the opposite way. Now, if you want to produce more force as a runner, you need to produce more force at every given part of the body. Each piece has to do its fair share, has to do the right amount of work in the right place at the right time. So are we ever in a planking position, firstly, when we run? Of course not. That's a no-brainer. Are we ever face down when we're running? No, of course not. To be face down, you would have fallen over. Are you ever in a neutral spine when you run? No, you're not, because you're rotating, you're laterally flexing. Are you ever dead still when you run? No, you're not. So plank fails again. So we've got 3 major exercises that fail, completely fail. And I know that there's going to be some angry faces, and I've upset a few people straight off the bat here. I know I have. But I'm not, I don't really care whether I upset you or not. What I care about is the results that you get. That's where I care. And this week I've worked with 3 new runners. And I've said these exact same things. And these are things that all 3 of these runners have been doing, and they're still injured. They keep getting repetitive injuries, even though they're doing the 3 exercises that I'm talking about here. And that's the reason why I'm talking about these 3 exercises, because all 3 of these runners have been doing these exercises and still getting injured, repeatedly injured in the same places. One of them, proximal hamstring tendinopathy. One of them, Achilles tendonitis. And one of them, a groin strain, repeated groin strain. So they're doing these exercises in the hope that they're going to firstly get injury free, secondly become a better runner doing them, because what a lot of runners do is they take these exercises that they've been given in rehab, in a rehab setting, and they just carry them on forever and ever and ever and ever. I see that quite a lot, and that again is a problem for me, because I'm like, why are you doing this ongoing? Because again, we have to go back to correct muscle group, correct part of that muscle group, which means correct range of motion, which also means correct load in the correct place at the correct time. So I want you to think about, if you're still kind of on the fence about strength training, I want you to ask yourself, if you do some arm exercises, are you training all parts of the arm and all parts of the movements of the arm by doing bicep curls or by doing some rowing movements? If all you did was, let's say all you did was push-ups. Let's say all you did was push-ups or press-ups, right? You're training your pecs, you're training your triceps, you're training your anterior shoulder, the front of your shoulder. You're training your some of the muscles that control extension of the lumbar spine, i.e. you're in a push-up position. Is that going to be training the pulling muscles in your arms and in your shoulders? The answer is no, because it's a pushing exercise, right? If all you did was push-ups and shoulder presses, then you wouldn't be training any of the pulling actions. Now, if you overdo the pushing exercises, then you're going to be way overly strengthening one action over another, and that's a big problem. It's a big problem for the shoulder joint, the shoulder girdle, the thoracic spine, and therefore everything else in the body, because it's all going to knock on, right? Because everything's connected to everything and everything impacts everything, as we know. So, if your strength training isn't involving all pieces of the pie, it's not involving all movements of the body, internal rotation, external rotation, and I know you might be sitting there going, but I don't know what they are. That's why I'm here to help you, is to show you and to explain to you and to try and help you understand these things. So let's take a look at the leg. This is internal rotation of the hip. This is external rotation of the hip. Okay, this is extension, this is flexion. This is extension of the knee, this is flexion of the knee. Okay, those are just some very basic movements. Now, if all you do is squats with the feet turned out like this, what are you doing to do the opposite of this? Are you doing any of this? Are you doing any of this movement? Right? The answer is probably no, because as a personal trainer, as a corrective exercise specialist, as a functional movement specialist, as somebody who's studied gait biomechanics and kinesiology, and somebody who's been in a gym setting in one way or another, as a massage therapist, as a sports therapist, for 25 plus years now, I don't see people doing these things. I don't see people doing any of these things. I don't see people training these movements. I don't see people training them at all. Now, there might be the odd person out there who's like, oh yeah, I do those. Yeah, I do those. Great, that's fantastic. But you're in the absolute minority. And for runners, these are like super important movements, because these are the movements that go hand in hand with the running movement. So if you are not training your internal rotation, your pronation, and if you're not doing these movements, training the rotational capacity of your spine really well, then you're most likely training yourself to be injured. And I know that sounds like a very kind of like, you know, harsh stance, that if you're not training this, then you're training yourself for that. But that's really the reality of it, because, you know, like I keep going on about, so many runners are injured, and they're not just injured once and then it's like, okay, that's my injury over. So it's not like jury duty where you're like, okay, done my jury duty, off I go for the rest of my life, and I might never get called up again. Probably won't. You're going to get injured again, and then again, and then again, and again and again and again and again, because that's what happens. And if you've got this far and you're still listening, probably most of you at this point will be nodding your head in agreement with what I'm saying, because you know that it's true. You probably, if you're at this point still and you're listening in, you've probably just gone, oh yeah, that was me. I suffered with this injury, then this injury, then this injury, then this injury. Well, but you did your rehab and then you got injured again, or you did your rehab and then something else got injured. That's literally proving to you that these things that you were doing are not helping you. Right? There's so much free content online. There's so much free stuff out there saying, do this, get stronger. Yeah, great, you do that, you get stronger, and then you get injured doing the thing that is not that thing that you've just been training. Because running is, you know, you're only using your body weight, right? But you're propelling your body weight really fast. And that's the thing that people seem to forget is, you know, I could lift weights, I could like lift 200 kilos or, you know, 350 pounds or whatever. But when I run, I'm not lifting any weights. I'm lifting myself. And I'm moving myself in a set way. I'm moving myself in a specific way. And so why am I getting injured when I'm not actually lifting anything? The reason why is speed of movement. And I'm going to give you a little analogy. If I was to bench press or squat, and you were on top, you were above the weights that I'm moving. So think of how fast I could move a bar with 300 pounds on it. It'd be pretty slow, right? I wouldn't be able to move that very fast. So if I hit you in the head with that weight, because you were standing above the weight or standing above the bar, and I hit you in the head with the bar, and the bar is traveling so slowly because of the weight that I've got on the bar, and the bar itself, of course, I'm moving it so slowly that it just wouldn't even hurt. You'd be like, oh, bang, oops, there you go, oh, I banged my head. But it didn't hurt because it was really slow, right? But how about this? If I got a penny and I baseball pitched it at your head, which one would you rather be hit by? The weights, the 300 pounds of weights that are coming at you at a ridiculously slow speed, or the penny that weighs almost nothing, weighs just a couple of grams, but it hits you in the head at 90 miles per hour, or whatever? There's the question, okay? Because force is very, very misunderstood. People see the weight, they see the load, and they think, wow, there's a lot of force. But they don't see the speed of the movement as being a factor in the force, because it is. Because remember, force is mass times acceleration. Now, if I can throw a penny at 90 miles per hour, it's got a very small impact point, it's got a very small and specific point that's going to hit you with. It's going to hit you with all of its force very, very hard. A lot of force, because it's been accelerated at 90 miles an hour. But if I hit you with that 300 pounds weight at 0.01 miles per hour, i.e. virtually no movement at all, because it's so heavy I can't accelerate it very fast, the penny is going to hurt far more. Now that's the situation with running, because when you land, and you land on your foot, you land on a specific point of your foot. Doesn't matter which foot and which landing, you're landing on a very specific part of your foot. And then when you take off from running, from the ground, you're taking off on a very specific part of your foot. It's not the whole foot. The whole foot doesn't come into contact or produce all the force. All the force doesn't go through the whole foot the whole time. It's little bits of your foot, little parts of your foot. So when you're strength training and you're doing your squats and you've got your whole foot on the ground, your whole foot is taking the load with your whole foot on the ground with the weight above your center of mass all the time. But that doesn't happen in running, because you hit the ground and your foot's out in front of you, everything is accelerating towards your foot at a really, really fast speed. Okay, so when all of your mass is accelerating towards your foot at a ridiculously fast speed, your foot isn't even in full contact with the ground, and it's your foot has come to a dead stop, but the rest of your body is accelerating towards it at a really fast rate. That's got nothing to do whatsoever with squatting, with doing a really slow squat with a really high weight, where the load is vertical and the force is vertical all the time. There's no horizontal force there, it's all vertical. In running, yeah, there's vertical, but there's a lot of horizontal, because think about it, when your foot lands, it lands in front of you, and then when you take off, your foot is now behind you, and the load, the force builds up. Now, if you're somebody like me, for example, I'm around about 150 pounds, 68, 65, 69 kilo, I don't know what I weigh, 65 kilos, 68 kilos, 150 pounds, 145 pounds, whatever. I take 3 steps per second or more, or slightly less. So let's just say 3 steps per second. And the force that goes through my foot and through my gastroc, through my soleus, through my calf and through my heel and through my foot could be up to 8 times my body weight in certain places. Okay, because it's mass times acceleration. It's not just my mass. I'm not just standing still. I'm running fast and I'm impacting the ground really fast. Okay, so the force that's going through my foot is huge, and it's also it's force on a very, very small surface area. So if I land on my heel, or I land on my the outside of my forefoot, let's say, then I've got all of this force going through this very, very small surface area, and that's going to be supported by muscles, fascia, tendons, ligaments, that if I haven't trained them to deal with that force, they're going to break, they're going to get hurt, they're going to get injured. So when you do your strength training exercises, you have to ask yourself, is this relative to the force that I'm being asked to produce, and not only produce but deal with? Because there's a difference between how much force I have to deal with and then how much force I have to produce to land, not face plant, not collapse, and then take off. The two, they're different forces. When I land, I have to deal and I have to cope with a lot of force. When I take off, I'm producing less force than when I land, because my center of mass is away from me, and I've already dealt with all of that force, and now it's going down. It's a different thing. And a lot of runners focus on producing force to take off. But people don't think about the force at the landing point and then before we get to mid-stance, and that's where a lot of it goes wrong. That's where you're going to get injured. And also the takeoff point being very, very specific. Like I said before, you're in a highly dorsiflexed position. Your ankle is very, very bent. You're on the ball of your foot, and your soleus muscle is at full stretch. Okay, and these are things that traditional strength training does not take into consideration one little bit. Not one little bit. And that's why I do what I do. That's why the sling method is here, because traditional strength training does not do what you need it to do, and that's why you're getting injured still. So let's wrap this up. All right, we've got the three main exercises that people do as runners. Calf raises, you work in the wrong muscle, in the wrong position, doing the wrong action, wrong range of motion. You got squats. Squats are not working the major running muscles, and in fact what they're also doing is they're destabilizing your posture, because of the way that they focus on the quads way more than they focus on the hamstrings. Big problem, big problem right there. You're going to completely destabilize and upset your posture. You're going to completely screw everything up. Okay, so then we go to planks. Completely wrong exercise, wrong position, wrong action. Well, there's no movement. Everything is wrong. Everything, literally everything is wrong there. All right, so we've got the three major exercises, main exercises that runners do, completely wrong, completely incorrect, and not training. Remember, we're talking about strength training. You have to overload the muscle, the right place at the right time. Okay, so that's what I'm going to leave you with. All right, it has to be in some way, shape or form the action of running with some way, shape or form the load with very mostly the position with that load. Okay, and it's not just vertical forces that you're dealing with, it's horizontal forces as well. Otherwise, how are you going from A to B, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, half marathon, marathon? How are you traveling these distances if there's no horizontal force? And it is not just falling forwards, because that's crap. That doesn't happen. All right, so I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to leave it there. It's a lot of talking, a lot of thinking that I'm asking you to do, and I want you to think about what you have got, the results that you have got. And if you keep getting injured, if you keep struggling with injuries or keep struggling with the same injury over and over again, your results are speaking to you. Your results are absolutely speaking to you. They're saying to you, hey, what you're doing, it ain't working. What you're doing, it ain't working. If every time you get into your marathon training block and at 16 miles or 13 miles or 10 miles or whatever it is you break, you get an injury, it's not working. What you're doing isn't working. And you might have your blinkers on. You might not know why. Hopefully, if you're still listening to this, you now know why. Alright? And there we go. It's just some small things about, the runners that I've been working with this week and helping them to just basically be better runners and be less injured and hopefully no injury. Hopefully not injured. Alright? Talk to you soon. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.